Somewhere in Berlin, a subway train disappears into the darkness beneath the city. Hundreds of passengers stare silently at glowing phone screens, each carrying a face that seems unmistakably German. Blonde hair, brown eyes, dark hair, blue eyes, every combination imaginable. Above them, glass towers reflect a nation known for engineering, precision, and one of the most influential histories in Europe. It feels permanent, as if Germany has always existed exactly as it does today. But beneath those streets lies another Germany, a Germany with no borders, no language, no kings, no flag, only bones. Thousands upon thousands of ancient skeletons sleep beneath forests, villages, riverbanks, and forgotten cemeteries stretching from the Rhine to the Elbe. For centuries they remain silent, their identities buried beneath layers of earth. Archaeologists uncovered their weapons, pottery, and ornaments, believing these objects could tell the whole story. They couldn't. Because the greatest archive was never carved into stone or written on parchment, it was locked inside their DNA. Only within the last 2 decades has science learned how to read that invisible archive. Using techniques that would have seemed impossible only a generation ago, researchers began extracting ancient DNA from tiny fragments of bone, especially the dense petrous bone inside the skull, where genetic material survives for thousands of years. Suddenly, people who had been dead for 10 millennia began answering questions historians had argued over for centuries. What they revealed did not simply rewrite German history, it shattered it. For generations, one powerful idea dominated the popular imagination. The Germans were believed to descend from one ancient Germanic people who had occupied Central Europe since time immemorial. The story sounded logical. Roman writers, such as Julius Caesar and Tacitus, described powerful Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine. Medieval chroniclers celebrated those tribes as the ancestors of later kingdoms. Over time, the image hardened into something larger than history itself. One people, one ancestry, one origin. It was an elegant story. Science rarely rewards elegant stories. Because when researchers compared the DNA of modern Germans with genomes recovered from skeletons buried across Europe, they found no evidence for a single ancestral population. Instead, every genome pointed toward repeated migrations, dramatic population replacements, and thousands of years of mixing between people who had once lived hundreds or even thousands of kilometers apart. That is not the whole story. To understand why, we have to forget the map of modern Germany entirely. Travel back not 1,000 years, not 5,000. Go back more than 12,000 years, to the end of the last ice age. The glaciers that once covered northern Europe were retreating. Vast tundras slowly transformed into forests filled with red deer, wild horses, elk, and aurochs. Small bands of hunter-gatherers moved through these changing landscapes, following rivers that would later become the Rhine, the Danube, and the Elbe. These were among the first known people to recolonize what is now Germany after the ice retreated. Their DNA has been recovered from archaeological sites, including Loschbohr in Luxembourg and several Mesolithicite sites across Central Europe. Their genetic signatures belonged largely to what geneticists call Western hunter-gatherers, a population distinct from both later European farmers and the pastoralists who would eventually arrive from the eastern steppe. They were unlike the image many people imagine today. Ancient DNA tells us many carried remarkably dark skin pigmentation while also possessing blue or light-colored eyes. Variants in genes such as SLC24A5 and SLC45A2, strongly associated with lighter skin in modern Europeans, were still uncommon among these early hunter-gatherers. The familiar appearance associated with northern Europe had not yet evolved. Already, the first myth begins to collapse. The earliest inhabitants of Germany did not resemble the stereotype many associate with the region today. But here is where the story breaks down even further. Those hunter-gatherers were not destined to become the dominant ancestors of modern Germans. Around 8,000 years ago, another people appeared. They did not arrive carrying swords. They carried seeds. Originating ultimately from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, early farming communities slowly expanded through southeastern Europe before moving into Central Europe. Archaeologists know them through cultures such as the linear band ceramic, or LBK culture, named after the distinctive linear patterns decorating their pottery. Their arrival changed everything. Forests were cleared. Permanent villages appeared, livestock spread across landscapes where only wild animals had roamed before. Population numbers exploded. For decades, historians debated whether farming spread through ideas or through people. Ancient DNA settled the argument. The farmers themselves had moved. Genomes recovered from LBK cemeteries showed they were genetically far closer to Anatolian Neolithic farmers than to the hunter-gatherers already living in Central Europe. In many regions, they replaced a large proportion of the earlier population, rather than simply teaching them agriculture, not gradual, not peaceful, everywhere, not merely cultural exchange, a demographic revolution. Modern Germany had already become the meeting place of entirely different peoples thousands of years before anyone would call themselves German. Yet another surprise emerged. Those early farmers did not completely erase the hunter-gatherers. Instead, centuries of coexistence gradually produced mixed communities. Genetic analyses reveal increasing hunter-gatherer ancestry appearing inside farming populations over time, suggesting interaction, intermarriage, and cultural exchange rather than total replacement. Already, the foundations of modern German ancestry were becoming more complicated than any legend had imagined. Two ancient worlds had become one, but the greatest transformation had not yet arrived. Roughly 5,000 years ago, something extraordinary began unfolding far to the east, across the immense grasslands, north of the Black and Caspian Seas, horse-riding pastoralists, cattle herders. People whose mobility allowed them to cross astonishing distances. Today they are known collectively as the Yamnaya. Their migration would permanently reshape the genetic landscape of Europe, including Germany, in ways no ancient chronicler ever witnessed. And when scientists finally sequenced their DNA, they discovered that a large proportion of the ancestry carried by millions of modern Germans could be traced back to those distant Eurasian steppe populations. The question was no longer whether Germany had one origin. The real mystery had become far more unsettling. If hunter-gatherers were only the beginning, and farmers arrived from Anatolia, and steppe pastoralists transformed Europe once again, then who, in genetic terms, were the first people anyone could truly call German? For decades, archaeologists believed pottery, weapons, and burial customs alone could explain who these newcomers were. A new style of axe appeared, and they assumed ideas had spread. A different kind of grave was uncovered, and they imagined cultures borrowing traditions from one another. It seemed logical. Civilizations had always exchanged technology without necessarily exchanging people. Ancient DNA revealed something far more dramatic. When researchers began sequencing genomes from skeletons associated with the corded ware culture, dating to around 2900 BCE, they discovered that these communities carried an extraordinary amount of ancestry from the Yamnaya pastoralists of the Pontic Caspian steppe. Studies led by researchers including David Reich at Harvard Medical School, Wolfgang Hack, and Johannes Krause demonstrated that this was not simply cultural influence. It represented one of the largest prehistoric migrations ever detected through genetics. In some parts of Central Europe, including what is now Germany, as much as 70 to 75% of the ancestry in corded ware individuals could be traced directly to steppe populations, not gradual, not symbolic. A demographic transformation. Entire communities changed within only a few centuries. The implications were staggering. Modern Germans were not simply descendants of Europe's first hunter-gatherers. They were not simply descendants of Anatolian farmers. They also carried substantial ancestry from people whose homeland lay more than 2,000 kilometers to the east. Three ancient worlds had collided, and each left permanent fingerprints inside the German genome. But the story grew even stranger. Another archaeological culture emerged across much of Western and Central Europe around 2800 BCE. Today it is known as the bell beaker culture, named after its distinctive bell-shaped pottery. For years, scholars debated whether bell beaker represented a shared culture or a movement of people. Once again, ancient DNA settled the argument. Research published in Nature by geneticist Inigo Olalde and colleagues showed that bell beaker communities were genetically diverse across Europe. In Iberia, many retained substantial ancestry from earlier farming populations. But in Central Europe, particularly across southern Germany, bell beaker individuals already displayed large proportions of steppe ancestry. The pottery spread widely, but the people carrying it were not genetically identical everywhere. Culture could travel without people. Sometimes people traveled with culture. Sometimes both happened together. History was never as simple as archaeology alone suggested. Over the next 1,000 years, these populations mixed continuously. Hunter-gatherer ancestry survived. Farmer ancestry remained significant. Steppe ancestry expanded. Every generation blurred the boundaries that earlier generations had carried. The result was not replacement by a single victorious people. It was fusion. A biological mosaic unlike anything imagined in earlier centuries. Then came another mystery: language. Most linguists believe the spread of steppe ancestry is closely connected to the expansion of Indo-European languages. While the exact mechanism remains debated, genetic and archaeological evidence strongly supports the idea that populations linked to the Yamnaya and later corded ware cultures played a major role in spreading ancestral Indo-European speech across much of Europe. That does not mean they spoke German. Far from it. The German language did not yet exist. Neither did France, neither did England, neither did Rome. The people whose DNA now forms a large part of modern Germany lived in worlds completely unlike anything recognizable today. Yet their descendants would eventually give rise to communities that spoke early Germanic languages. But here is where another popular belief begins to collapse. Many imagine the Germanic tribes as a single biological people sharing one common ancestry. Ancient DNA paints a different picture. By the time Germanic identities emerged during the Late Bronze Age and Early Iron Age, the populations of Central and Northern Europe had already been mixing for thousands of years. Germanic was primarily a linguistic and cultural identity. Not a genetically uniform race, neighboring tribes often shared more DNA with Celtic or Slavic populations than modern myths would ever suggest. Boundaries shifted, languages changed, alliances formed and disappeared, genes ignored political borders. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rhine in the 1st century BCE, he believed he was describing distinct Germanic peoples beyond Rome's frontier. His observations became foundational to European history. Later, the Roman historian Tacitus described independent tribes united by customs, warfare, and language. Their writings remain invaluable historical sources, but neither Caesar nor Tacitus knew anything about DNA. Neither could see that the people they described already carried thousands of years of mixed ancestry from Ice Age hunters, Anatolian farmers, and Eurasian pastoralists. The Romans observed a moment in history. Genetics revealed the entire journey. Even physical appearance tells the same story. Many people associate Germany with blonde hair and blue eyes, assuming these traits have always dominated the region. Ancient DNA shows otherwise. Variants influencing lighter skin became increasingly common only after the arrival and mixing of farming and steppe populations. Alleles associated with blue eyes had existed among some hunter-gatherers long before, while blonde hair appears to have increased through later population mixing and natural selection. The image of the typical German was never frozen in time. It evolved generation after generation as people moved, as climates changed, as populations blended. Every face became a living archive of thousands of years of human history. By the beginning of the Iron Age, the foundations of the modern German gene pool were already taking shape. Yet they remained far from complete. The Roman Empire would alter migration patterns. The migration period would send entire peoples across Europe. Viking trade networks, medieval settlements, Slavic expansion, plague, warfare, and countless local movements would continue reshaping the genetic landscape for another 2,000 years. The story was still unfolding, but before kingdoms, before emperors, before the Holy Roman Empire, before Germany itself, another hidden record had survived every invasion and every generation, a record carried not by fathers, but by mothers. And what those maternal lineages preserved would reveal an even older chapter of the German story, one that had remained hidden since the end of the Ice Age. But the deepest story of Germany is not written in kings, wars, or borders. It is written inside the mitochondria of every living person. Mitochondrial DNA, passed only from mothers to children, carries a direct line back through time that never recombines, never resets, never disappears. When scientists studied maternal lineages in modern Germany, they found a pattern that stretches deep into prehistoric Europe. Haplogroups, such as HU5, JT, and K, dominate the maternal genetic landscape. Some of these lineages, like U5, trace back to Europe's earliest hunter-gatherers who survived the Ice Age in isolated refuges. Others, like H and J, expanded later with the arrival of Neolithic farmers from Anatolia. Each maternal lineage is a surviving thread of a different migration wave. There is no single origin, only layers. Stacked over time, the same pattern appears in autosomal DNA, which combines ancestry from all ancestors. Modern Germans show a three-way genetic structure that reflects everything uncovered in ancient DNA studies. A significant portion from Western hunter-gatherers, a large contribution from early European farmers, and a major input from steppe pastoralists linked to the Yamnaya horizon. None of these components alone defines them. Together, they form the genetic foundation of modern Central Europe. Even Y chromosome evidence tells the same story from the paternal side. Haplogroups such as R1b and R1a, often associated with steppe expansions, are widespread in Western and Eastern Germany respectively, while lineages like I1 and I2 preserve deeper European roots from earlier hunter-gatherer populations. The distribution is not uniform. It shifts from region to region, reflecting centuries of migration, settlement, and local expansion. Southern Germany shows different frequencies than northern Germany. The Rhineland differs from Bavaria. Saxony differs from Schleswig-Holstein. There is no single genetic map of Germany, only gradients shaped by movement. Ancient DNA confirms this variability is not recent. It is ancient. Even physical traits tell the same layered story. Variants in genes like SLC24A5 and SLC45A2, associated with lighter skin pigmentation, became widespread only after Neolithic and steppe migrations. Eye color variation linked to HER2 and OCA2 shows a complex history where blue eyes were present in some Ice Age hunter-gatherers long before spreading more broadly in later populations. Lactase persistence, the ability to digest milk into adulthood, increased significantly after the spread of pastoralist societies in Europe, becoming particularly common in northern and central regions over time. Every trait reflects adaptation layered on top of migration. Then history accelerated. Roman expansion brought new trade routes and genetic inflows along the Rhine frontier. The migration period between the 4th and 6th centuries CE introduced large-scale movements of Goths, Vandals, Lombards, and other groups across Europe. Later, Viking activity influenced northern coastal regions, while Slavic expansions shaped eastern Germany, particularly in areas like Brandenburg and Saxony. Each wave added subtle shifts, not replacements anymore, but refinement. By the Middle Ages, regional populations had stabilized into recognizable forms that would later become associated with modern German identity. Yet even then, surnames, dialects, and local communities preserved traces of older migrations. Genetic studies from institutions such as the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology and research published in journals like Nature and Science confirm that most of the structure seen in modern Germany was already in place by the medieval period, with only gradual changes since. So when modern genomics compares ancient skeletons to living Germans today, the conclusion is not one of purity, but continuity through mixture. There was never a single moment when the Germans appeared. There was only a long, unfolding process where different peoples, separated by geography and time, gradually merged into something new. And this is the final truth ancient DNA reveals. The Germans were never what they were imagined to be in older historical narratives. Not a single ancient tribe preserved unchanged through time. Not a pure lineage emerging from one forested homeland. Instead, they are the result of one of Europe's most complex genetic tapestries, woven from Ice Age survivors, Neolithic farmers, steppe pastoralists, and countless later migrations that blurred every boundary time tried to create. To look at modern Germany is to look at continuity without origin, identity without simplicity, history without a single beginning. And perhaps that is the most honest story genetics can tell us, not who came first, but how many came together until a land became a people, and a people became a mirror of all those who came before them. The DNA does not answer the question of purity, it dissolves it forever,